The Hidden Universe, an investigation into non-human intelligence with Anthony Peake. This is going to be awesome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and I've known Anthony for about 10 years now. We've actually done several interviews together, and I'll leave links in the video description box for our previous shows. The first time we had a discussion was about 10 years ago with an alternative website platform that had a round table group discussion. I was one of the co-hosts. That was a lot of fun. And he always brings it. Every time we talk, it seems to go to the next level. If you haven't heard of Anthony before, let me give you a quick introduction. Anthony Peake is rapidly developing a reputation for being one of the world's most original thinkers in the study of altered states of consciousness, non-human intelligences. His work focuses on finding scientifically based answers to the great mysteries of human consciousness, from near-death experiences to the reality behind encounters with extraterrestrials and non-human intelligence. So today we're going to talk about his latest work, The Hidden Universe, an investigation into non-human intelligences. I'll give you a quick intro. Before I do, I wanted to thank my friends real quick over at tradelikeagenius.com. Have you checked these guys out yet? I mean, it's really simple. You go to the website, you check out their bundled options that are heavily discounted. And if you want to get one of the non-bundled items, use the code NEWYEAR for a 50% discount on the non-bundled items. And they are proprietary trading algorithms. They send you trade alerts via email or text message. I've been with them now for about 3 years. I've been very successful at Trade Like a Genius. And you can take a lot of the guessing out of trading. So give them an opportunity. Let them know Leak Project sent you. You'll be glad you did. And check out those bundled options. It's really neat when you wake up and you've got another opportunity. A lot of people are sitting at home. A lot of people are looking for opportunities to work out of their house. Well, if you're a trader, you can trade just about anywhere. You've got an internet connection or a cell phone connection. It's awesome. TradeLikeAGenius.com. You'll be glad you did. And let's bring in the legend, Mr. Anthony Peake, right now. But almost forgot. Let me share with you an intro to The Hidden Universe and investigation into non-human intelligences. From aliens or ghosts to the Jinn, fairies and UFO abductions. This book is the most comprehensive and enlightening survey ever made on encounters with the others. This book continues Anthony Peake's work in developing a completely original model of reality based upon an amalgamation of ancient belief systems, subjective human experiences of the extraordinary, and the latest discoveries of neurology, neurochemistry, quantum mechanics, and cosmology. This model proposes that consciousness, far from being simply an accident of evolution, is the actual root source of the material universe. It suggests that at its most basic level, everything that is seemingly physical is rendered into existence by consciousness. Check out Anthony's website, anthonypeake.com. Subscribe to Mr. Peake's YouTube channel. I'll leave the links specific in the video description box. And let's rock and roll. I'm also recording it. So, Anthony, it is an honor to speak with you. Thank you for being a guest on Leak Project. I love the hat. How the heck are you?
I'm really well. I'm really well. And the fact that both of us are wearing matching hats certainly says something. Is this synchronicity? Is this superposition? Is it spooky action at a distance? Who knows? But we're wearing the same hats, or slightly different color. But other than that, yeah, because I was sent a lot nice freebies by Julian over here in the UK. And I've got the baseball cap and various other things on the snood. So it's really cool. Really good.
I wanted to talk about that. So that's actually another matrix sync, the superpositioning thing here. One of the first questions that I had lined up for you is you talk about the others, and they seem to be everywhere and anywhere.
Yeah.
What are they, man?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question. And in my latest book, I try to come up with a concept I call the egregorials. And what I'm putting together is a hypothesis to suggest that they are part of us and not part of us, in the sense that we create them. And they use our intelligence to bring themselves through from somewhere else. Now, the one thing you will know about my work, having read it, and I know people who read my work will say this, there is nothing but nothing I ever write that is not backed up by pure science. I don't mean by speculation. I do not mean anything of that sort. I mean literal academic papers and research. So whenever you read my books, you will have page after page of references to academic articles. I very much take the approach of saying, what does the science tell us about this? And then take it from there. And there's developing a lot of information here at the moment to say about what these entities are, how people communicate them, and what kind of circumstances do they communicate. And we can talk about this over a period of the next 2 hours. But to me, there's strong evidence that these entities have been with us for an awful long time, since the beginning of time, really. They're part of us, you know, from tulpas to, you know, because this is what magical traditions have always been about. It's been actually creating these things in one way or another.
That was actually another question I was going to ask, is how far back with the research that you've done with this subject, like when did they start writing about it, or do we have evidence that they started?
Well, it's more than writing about it. It is depicting it. It's cave paintings. And I was intrigued to discover that around about 2017, I think it was, there were excavations being done in northern India. And they discovered a cave that hadn't been opened for 10,000 years. And inside the cave were cave paintings. And the cave paintings depicted creatures with large almond-shaped eyes, two slits for a nose, a slit for a mouth, and 2 holes for a nose, and with large bulbous heads. Now, this was in northern India. At a similar time, there were a group of cave paintings down in the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa, which Graham Hancock talks about, okay, called the Junction Shelter. Within these cave paintings, they depict exactly the same creatures. Now, the reason I was particularly intrigued by this, I don't know if in my last interview I discussed my mother's experience.
You did, but could you refresh us again on that? That was fascinating.
Okay, my mother is somebody who, or was somebody that wasn't interested in any shape or form with anything weird or unusual. You know, she didn't do this. But one evening she phoned me up, and she had been walking on to the village with my aunt. We were brought up on a comparatively isolated village in the northwest of England. And she phoned me up and she said, Tony, I've just had a really strange experience. And I said, what? And she said, well, I was coming home, your aunt leant down to tie her shoelace. And as she leant down, I looked over her head and I saw her over Price's factory, which is a local factory up on the Wirral that my father used to work at, which is closed years ago. But she said she saw what she described as a cloud of smoke. And this cloud of smoke was moving around in a vortex and then shot off towards North Wales. Okay. And she said, Tony, what did I see? And I said, well, Mum, I don't know. Now, the interesting thing and the important point about this, and it's central to my overall hypothesis here, is that my mother lost her eye with malignant melanoma about 15 years before, and she was developing cataracts in her good eye. So effectively, she was partially sighted. So whatever she was seeing was partially an external reality and also part of her. Okay. Now, what is intriguing about this, when I posted this on Facebook, soon after it happened, I had a message on Facebook from a friend of mine called Morrigan Howkins. And she had been traveling on a bus that day on the A41 road on the Wirral, crossing something called the White Bridge between Brommerpool, where this happened, and a place called Port Sunlight. And she saw the UFO. She saw it fly over the bus, and a lot of other people saw it because they looked at it. Okay, so there was something out there in 3-dimensional consensual reality that had been seen. So whatever my mother saw was out there. Now, my aunt stays overnight, and then the next day after, 2 days afterwards, sorry, she phones me up in the morning, and she's in a state of hysteria. And I said, Mum, calm down, what's the problem? And she said, Tony, you know the way I live alone, you know the way I always close my bedroom door. I'm very, very sensitive to the fact that, you know, what's happening, and I'm on my own. She wakes up in the middle of the night and she's in a state of sleep paralysis. Now, sleep paralysis, as you know, it's like REM intrusion. It's the way in which the body paralyzes you to stop you damaging yourself when you're in a dream state. So it literally paralyzes the limbs so you don't thrash around, damage yourself and damage other people when you're having a nightmare. So you can't move. But sometimes you wake up in this state and you feel like there's something sitting on your chest. It's been known for years. It's known as the hag. It's a standard trope within esoteric traditions and within out-of-body experiences, lucid dreaming and everything else as well. But she said that she looked towards the door and she noticed something strange. She noticed that the door was open. Now, not only that, but as she was watching the door the door was open, she noticed 3 spindly fingers come down the edge of the door and this entity pop its head round, and her description was quite precise. She said it had huge black insectoid eyes. She had 2 holes for a nose and a slit for a mouth. And she said it looked at me and realized I was awake and it dodged back. It was aware of the fact I was seeing it. And she said, Tony, what the hell was that? Now, putting 2 and 2 together, she sees a UFO, and the very next night, she has an encounter with a classic grey. Okay. Now, the image she described there is exactly the same image that was found in the Junction shelter. It was exactly the same image that was found in these cave paintings in northern India. So clearly, whatever this is, it's some form of archetype. It's some kind of image that carries us through. Now, I then spoke to my mother, and a few days later, I'm talking to her. I visited her and I'm talking to her. And she turns around to me and she says, the children that sing when I'm shopping, they've stopped singing. They don't sing as much anymore. And I said, Mum, what children? And she said, the children, they sometimes come in the house as well. And she said, they're not really children, they're little people. And they sing to me. They have this high-pitched sound they make. And I thought, are you letting children in here, Mum? And she said, no, they're different to that. She said, they're like small people. And she said, but they're not as friendly as the old man in the kitchen because he smiles at me. And I'm going, what? You've got an old man in the kitchen? She said, yeah. He never speaks, but he's very friendly. Now, I know from my writings and my own research in terms of unusual psychological states, I immediately drew 2 and 2 together. And I said, she's partially sighted. She's elderly. She's developing what's called Charles Bonnet syndrome. Charles Bonnet syndrome is a known effect where the visual system, because it's not seeing things properly, it starts to confabulate imagery in the external world. And it's normally figures, it's people standing around, it's people looking at people. It's a hypnagogic imagery, you know, that imagery you get just before you go to sleep or just before you wake when you see faces in profile, where you hear whispering voices. It's called hypnagogia just before you go to sleep, and hypnopompia just before you wake up. Again, these are known psychological effects. There's nothing here I'm not saying you won't find in the standard book on psychology, okay? So Charles Bonnet syndrome was something isolated by, interestingly enough, somebody called Charles Bonnet, who was a Swiss doctor. And he discovered that his uncle, a guy called Charles Lewin, started describing to him, he was seeing people, women with wonderful flowing hats and things, but there was nobody there. And Charles Bonnet decided that this is something that's related to somebody getting old. It's usually with elderly people and normally people with partially sighted. So I managed to get my mother to go to the doctor, and the physician she went to see self-evidently had never heard of Charles Bonnet syndrome, because I said, look, this is what she's seeing, and I suspect it's Charles Bonnet syndrome. The doctor looked at me as if I was mad and said, I've never heard of that. I said, well, I suggest you check up on it, because we don't expect doctors to know everything about everything. And we subsequently got a diagnosis, because Charles Bonnet syndrome can be a precursor to Alzheimer's disease. And I was right. We then got the diagnosis and she's had Alzheimer's disease. Now, the reason this is happening and the reason she was experiencing this is something quite fascinating. Alzheimer's disease is caused by things called amyloid plaques. And these are bodies that what they do is they get into the brain through the bloodstream, they get into the brain. And what they do is they literally explode the neurons of the brain. Now, they particularly attack things called the microtubules. Now, microtubules are very, very tiny bits of protein, and they are the protein that hold together the neurons of the brain. Because, you know, neurons of the brain can be very, very long. Some of them can be feet long, okay? And they need structure. So just like you'll have a structure to a house, these are the things that hold it together. But the amyloid plaques hit these and they destroy them. They stop them functioning effectively. Now, There's a guy called Stuart Hammerhoff, who's professor of anesthesiology at the University of New Mexico, Arizona. I'm sorry, it's Arizona. And he has been working with a guy called Roger Penrose, who recently won the Nobel Prize for Physics in the UK. So this is a top mathematician guy. And Hammerhouse and Penrose have been developing something called a theory about how quantum effects bring about consciousness in the brain. It's called orchestrated objective reduction, or OR, okay? Now, they say that what is taking place is that consciousness is drawn up from somewhere else, from the quantum field, by the microtubules in the brain. Now, I'd argue that the microtubules act as a kind of a reception signal, like a television reception signal. And these are the things that bring in the signals from elsewhere, because they know that microtubules are quite strange structures. They give off single pulses of electromagnetic energy. And the single pulses join together from either side of the microtubule to cause interference patterns, like holograms inside the microtubules. Now, I've argued, as Rick Strassman has argued and other people, that all these things together, working together, create what we consider to be external reality. They create this external hologram that we consider to be reality, okay? Now, when the microtubules start to get damaged by the amyloid plaques, this is what then brings about the opening the doors of perception, which was one of my previous books, opening the doors of the opening the doors of perception. And all my previous books, I do the neurology of this. So what I'm thinking is happening is that, do you know the way 1954, Aldous Huxley wrote his book, The Doors of Perception? And he wrote the book because he'd had influence, he'd taken hallucinogenic substances, which had been brought down to him from Canada for him. And his experience was so powerful, he realized that certain substances open up the doors of perception. They allow us to see the reality behind the reality. Now, again, The Doors of Perception is taken from The Augurs of Innocence, which was written by William Blake. This is a William Blake poem. And William Blake says, if the doors of perception were open, we will see the world as it really is, infinite. Okay, so rolling back now to my mother's experience, what I think happens when the amyloid plaques attack, they destroy the brain's ability to filter information, to act as what Aldous Huxley and C.D. Broad, an English philosopher, called the reducing engine. The brain reduces what is out there, or what is available to our perceptions. It reduces it right down to allow us to function effectively within this world. So, for instance, you never hear, where you're talking now, we're talking now, you're hearing my voice, but there's probably the sound of traffic, there's all the other things around you, but you don't hear them. This is because this is how we need to function. But when the doors of perception are open, suddenly they get wider. Now, I'll finish this monologue in a second, because then we can apply what was happening to my mother and her experience of the entity together with young children. Young children have what's called quasi-corporal companions. A guy called Michael Halliwell wrote a book a few years ago, and he cited the term quasi-corporal companions. What quasi-corporal companions are when children have these mythical friends that they have, that they see. Because children see these things all over the place. They are, their minds are open. Why are they open? They're open because the neurons of their brain haven't been myelinated yet. Myelination is in the neurons of the brain. It's the insulation of the neurons. And when the neurons get insulated, it breaks down your ability to open your doors of perception. It reduces you down. I also argue that it's to do again with the myelination of something called the corpus callosum, which is the thing that holds the two sides of the brain together. So young children have this experience, and elderly people have these experiences. They're the same experience. You know, and in my writings, I think I'm the only person that suggested this, that neurologists need to be looking at this. Because again, as a finishing point, a friend of mine called Maggie Latourelle has written a book called The Gift of Alzheimer's. And in The Gift of Alzheimer's, she describes in detail her mother's deterioration into Alzheimer's disease. Her mother was starting to develop precognitions. She was seeing visions. She knew what her daughter was up to, although her daughter lived 250 miles away. intriguing. So I do the neurology of this, and I believe these entities are around us all the time, but our brains are locked into, as Plato said, we are locked into we're seeing the shadows on the wall. But under certain circumstances, when we take DMT, when we have experiences, when we see entities, the doors are open suddenly and they can come through, if that makes sense.
It does. And you actually it took me, as I'm listening to you, I'm like, okay, I got to write down the way to ask him the next question, because it's a deep question. And you answered a lot of it there towards the end when you said you think that there's a lot of these beings around us, but we don't see them necessarily because of the limitations we have in our body. This is what I wrote down. This is the way that I wrote down the question.
Straight.
Dude, I think it's awesome, man. So many people are complimenting the hats in the chat. It's awesome. And Julian's in there. He's like, yes, yes. So Julian, man.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, I love it. It's awesome.
Okay, go on then.
Okay. And you know what I respect about you, Anthony? Remember 10 years ago when we did that first interview when I was it was a co-host for GLP and there was, it was a great interview, but you said, look, man, I'm about the science. I'm not about the conspiracy thing. You made that very clear, but and you always you make a point to show that. And I think that's super important. Unfortunately, the word conspiracy just means two or more people behind closed doors plotting something that might be nefarious, but it's been turned into like, woo-woo kind of stuff. And I get it. I totally get it. So I love how you bring the science to the equation, because I'm about science too, man. I think that, so this is my question. Do you suggest it is a byproduct or side effect of the brain and nothing more, or the unveiling of the spirit world? And I think you described that towards the end of that.
I think the answer is going deeper. I think at the moment my new book, I'll be describing this in great detail, because what I do is I drill into cosmology and I drill into quantum physics. And by drilling in, I don't mean that I have a vague idea what these things are. As much as anybody can understand quantum physics, and of course nobody, even Richard Feynman said anybody who claims they understand quantum physics hasn't understood it, which again, Niels Bohr said that. But if you look at the pure evidence of what quantum physics is telling us about the true nature of reality, you start to find that reality evaporates. Solid reality isn't there. There isn't anything solid. The only reason that you don't fall through your chair is because of electrostatic repulsion. When the atoms of your backside are like a magnet repelling the chair and the atoms in the chair and the molecules in the chair. So, people believe that this is physically real. It's not real in the same way that we believe reality to be. We process information externally, and our brain creates this internal model of what external reality is. People who believe that there's a one-to-one relationship between external reality and what they perceive are actually known technically by the scientists as naive realists. They're naive because they don't fully understand, and they shouldn't. Why should they? Everything seems solid, it seems real. But in the new book, I'm going to be going into this and saying, but if we start drilling down into the behavior of subatomic particles, the particles can be in two places at the same time. The particles can tunnel between places. The reason the sun shines is because of something called quantum tunneling, which means that an object, if there's enough subatomic particles banging against a barrier, statistically, a very small amount of them will end up the other side of the barrier. They will appear the other side. And this is how the sun shines. This is how hydrogen is changed into helium. Okay, it's a profoundly important concept here. Photosynthesis works in exactly the same way. So what we're discovering now is that the universe works in a far more curious way. And any physicists that make these wonderful statements saying, we understand it all, they don't. Anybody who really knows we don't. Okay. So the question is, what is really going on here? Now, a guy called David Bohm, who was an American physicist who fell foul of the McCarthyite witch hunts in the 1950s, ended up at, I think it was Birkbeck College in London. And while he was there, he came up with something he called the explicate and implicate orders. Now, he worked with Oppenheimer. He knew Einstein. This guy's a big hitter, okay, massive big hitter. What he said was that if you look, the smallest possible bit of space you can have is something called the Planck length, okay? It's absolutely ridiculously tiny. Then you have the smallest thing that we can see with our most powerful microscopes. And by powerful microscopes, I'm suggesting things like the Large Hadron Collider, because effectively what it is a bloody big microscope. There's a level of around about 14 sizes of difference between the smallest thing we can detect and the smallest thing that is possible. Now, that is as big a distance as it is between the tiniest subatomic particle and the universe. So there's this whole area of size that we have no idea what's going on. Now, what Bohm said was this is where quantum physics starts straightening out and becomes normal again. It's what Einstein called hidden variables. It's the idea that we see all the effects of quantum physics and they don't make any sense. And they don't make any sense because we haven't drilled down far enough into them. And there will be a logic when we get further down into them. So when we see, for instance, we see subatomic particles being in two places at the same time. It's a fact. Now, as even Richard Feynman said, what about positing the idea that at a lower level of reality, two subatomic particles are actually one subatomic particle that we're seeing as two? And at a deeper level of reality, they're a singular object. Therefore, they can communicate instantaneously, something called spooky action at distance or superposition. Because if you take two subatomic particles and you entangle them, you put them in the same subatomic state, then you spin one off thousands of miles away and you spin another off thousands of miles away. If you detect one, you instantaneously make the other one change its spin. Before they're observed, their spin quality, all subatomic particles have something called spin, and they can either be spin up or spin down. But you don't know until you've observed a subatomic particle whether it's spin up or spin down. And quantum physics is quite precise, is saying that an object has no qualities of existence until it is observed or measured. So until it's observed, it's neither up nor down. When it's then measured or observed, the one over here sees itself as being spin up, and the other one over here immediately knows it should be spin down. That's called spooky action at a distance. It has been proven time and time again. There's a guy called Anton Zeilinger at the University of Vienna that's doing this work. Okay, so what this means is that we are interpreting the physics that we're seeing based upon, I use the analogy, you know, when I was at university, I did a course on the history of science and everything else as well, and the sociology of scientific thought. And there is something called a theory that there are scientific belief systems, and they then change into a new scientific belief system. Okay, the guy called Cohn came up with it. And the idea is that at medieval times, the medieval scientists, they could explain everything in the same way that we could explain everything using their worldview. For instance, they explained the retrograde motion of the outer planets by something called epicycles, because of course they believed the Earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around the Earth, including the sun. So in order to accommodate, they came up with what they called epicycles, which are the kind of the idea that the planets sort of revolve backwards on themselves. They considered it worked, but of course it didn't, because they were looking at it in the wrong way. And it was only when Copernicus came along and Kepler and everybody else, and it all changed. And then suddenly we saw the universe as we think it really is now. But the problem is we're doing it still. For instance, there is something called inflation. Now, inflation is the weirdest thing you can imagine, because there's a problem with the Big Bang. You talk to cosmologists, they don't like talking about this. But the observation of how the universe is at the moment in terms of its state, the way it seems to be in all directions, the same cosmic energy is coming down, the same temperature. I think it's something like 2.4 degrees Kelvin. So it's 2.4 degrees above absolute zero. And the temperature's everywhere. In any direction you look, it's the same. Now, if the Big Bang started at one point and expanded outwards, there would be difference in temperatures. There isn't. That doesn't make any sense. Nor does the fact that the universe has expanded far further than it should have done in 13.8 billion years or whatever it is from the Big Bang. So in order to accommodate this, like the epicycles, they come up with something they call inflation. And the idea is in the first billionth of a second, the universe expanded from nothing Remember, the universe expanded from a place of nothing. There was no time, there was no matter, there was nothing. So how it even started when there was no time is a massive conundrum. But it expands outwards at hundreds of times the speed of light. They don't know how it did this. They've no idea. But in order to make what they are seeing now make sense, they come up with this wild idea called inflation. Alan Guth came up with it. And everybody just accepts it. The scientists just accept it. That the speed of light, you know, because of course, space is not physical. So space is not constricted by because it's matter that can't travel any faster than the speed of light. But space supposedly can. But what was space expanding into? Space was expanding into nothingness. Okay. And it seems to me that they make up these just so stories. And to make up what they see, like dark matter, 94% of the universe seems to be missing. And the reason it's missing, they think it's missing, is because of how galaxies revolve. Galaxies revolve in completely the wrong way, that as if the amount of matter that are in them. So they realize that 94% of galaxies, the matter or whatever is in the galaxies, is missing. So they come up with dark matter. They don't mean dark matter is dark because it's dark. It's because they don't know what the hell it is. They've no idea what it is. But they come up with these just so stories. It's like, you know, how the donkey got its tail. You know, it's the same kind of made up stories. They're all suffering from hubris. They don't want to admit that they need to go back to square one. You know, there is in England, there's a guy called Heath Robinson that used to be a guy that used to do these wonderful contraptions and drawings. I call it Heath Robinson science. You know, I met up with a top quantum physicist at UMIST, where they split the University of Manchester. One of the youngest professors in quantum physics, and Jeff Forshaw. And Jeff and I were doing an event at the National Theatre in London. So we met up over coffee. And over coffee, Jeff just said in passing, of course, we know that every electron in the universe knows the location of every other electron. You turn around and say that to the man down the pub, they'll say, oh, come on, that can't be true. But these scientists are in denial of precognition. They're in denial of déjà vu. They're in denial of telepathy, remote viewing. And yet they're quite happy to believe that the universe expanded at thousands of times the speed of light for a few seconds just to accommodate the maths. You know, this is not science, it's scientism. And in the new book, I'm going to be blowing this to pieces. I'm going to be really taking this apart and saying, come on, guys, you know, really be truthful here. Stop pretending that you actually know when you don't. You have a model of understanding. And David Bohm, I think, is the guy that I'm going to be really pushing his work, because I think that Bohm really gets it. Now, so where are these entities then? Well, if the universe is not what it seems and physical reality is not what it seems, does it mean that consciousness is not what it seems? Because the great mystery of modern science is called the hard problem of conscious. Hard problem of science is how inanimate matter in your head, atoms and molecules reacting in fields, create Rex, create Tony, create Julian, and all those listeners out there. Something's going on in your head, and it's not your brain cells. It's something greater than that, because inanimate matter cannot create consciousness. And David Chalmers in 1999 stood up at the University of Arizona and made this statement and said, you know, we have the soft problem of science, how the brain works, but the hard problem is how something as ephemeral as consciousness, all your hopes, all your dreams, the qualia, the taste of a curry, the color red, these are all things that your brain creates. They are not out there. And the amount of times I get arguing with people when somebody says, of course, red is out there. I've got a red book. Well, no, you haven't. You've got a book that's surface is bouncing back the electromagnetic spectrum and of white light. It's bouncing back just the red part of that wavelength. It's a wavelength. It's not a color. It's just like there's no such thing as taste. You know, in the Matrix, they say this, don't they? Cypher turns around and says, you know, how do we know that everything tastes like chicken? But the taste of chicken doesn't exist out there. Pain doesn't exist out there. You can't share pain with anybody else. So why isn't pain an hallucination? I'll say that to scientists and they'll go, oh, no, 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 it's different. No, it's not. It's something that you personally feel that you can't share with anybody else, which is exactly the definition of an hallucination. So we need to start really taking apart. And this is why I get quite annoyed with these new age wackos that come in and they make these huge statements and they get crucified, they get shot down, and they get shot down because they don't do the facts. They don't do the research. They do their research in a way that they reinforce their beliefs, you know, this kind of echo chamber thing, where you research things because it supports what you believe in. What you need to do is to go back and turn around. And when a quantum physicist turns around to me and says, you know, well, you know, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says this, I know enough to turn around and say, no, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle doesn't say that. It says this. And you watch them and they'll go, oh, wasn't expecting that. Wasn't expecting a non-physicist to understand Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, because we are the magical people that understand all this. And it's kind of hidden. You know, you don't get discussions on quantum physics. Now, going back to my point then, so these entities, I believe, are quasi-brain generated. But to make one final point, and this is the intriguing one, if the universe started from a point particle, a point something infinitesimally small, so small it didn't exist, and everything that we have in the universe came from that singularity, that is crazy in the first place. Well, let's not talk about this. I'd argue that what is happening is that was when the program was switched on. There is nothing on your computer screen until somebody switches the program on. That's what happened with the Big Bang. It was switched on, okay? So it's switched on and it comes out. When it's a point particle, every single subatomic particle in the universe was one single particle. Every atom of your body, every atom of everybody else's body was all together in one point particle. What did I say before? If you entangle particles, they can communicate instantaneously. I believe the whole universe is entangled. There is no out there. There is no in there. The human brain creates this illusion of space, the illusion of time, in order for us to function within this, whatever it is that we're in. I call it the Bohmian IMAX, okay? And the entities are out there. The entities are part of this. And again, as a final point, I believe that the entities can use certain ways. And if we get touching on it, I'll tell you about the neurology, because I know your guest yesterday was talking about the pineal gland, okay? I'll be talking about the pineal gland in a different way. I can talk about the pineal gland as to how the pineal gland works, what neurotransmitters work within the pineal gland, and what the pineal gland is really doing. And believe me, it is far more exciting than anything you can believe.
Well, I think we need to go there. And I would just like to prime that with the past couple of days. Like you said, we've been doing podcasts on the pineal gland. And I had a great guest on yesterday, Mr. Jimmy Jones, where
he was good. Yeah, I saw him.
You know, man, that guy is really enlightened. You could just tell by his energy, something truly magnificent happened to him, and it changed his perception and reality. I think that's beautiful, man. But I also, the day before that, I had a guest on where Mika Dank, where he showed how in the Bible, in Genesis 32:30, Jacob wrestles with an angel of God, and at the next day, when he finally finishes wrestling with an angel of God and he prevails, he says he met him in the pineal. Yeah. And there's a location in Israel, in the Middle East, that's actually called the pineal, but he brought up the pineal and the pineal, seeing the face of God and living to tell the tell. And pineal gland, hello, the connection there in the Bible, yeah. That's brilliant. He met the face of God in the pineal. But it's described as a place. But then you're like, wait a second there, man. And that made me question, are there entities that want to hijack our pineal gland because they don't have a connection to source anymore? So they kind of want to use us as the hookup.
Well, I hope your guest actually referenced where he probably got that from. Did he mention Joel Baxt?
No.
Okay,
no.
Joel Baxt is a rabbi that lives in Manitou Springs in Colorado. And around about 12 years ago, he wrote a book called the Dragon in the Torah. And in it, he discusses in great detail about the links between DMT, the pineal gland, and the Old Testament, particularly the Torah. Okay. Now, I then included that very pineal story in my own book, would have been The Infinite Universe, probably about 10 years ago, something like that. And the link between pineal, and the idea of Jacob's ladder as well, and the links there to it. Okay, so the pineal source is quite an interesting one, but we can stretch it maybe sometimes too far. Just because a word sounds like a word doesn't mean it is. You know, the reason they called it pineal was because it looks like a pine cone. Okay, so a word that happens to be in Aramaic or in its Latin into Greek, you know, it doesn't mean because it sounds like it, it's the same thing. And an awful lot of people get carried away. It's like numerologists. They get carried away with numbers to such an extent, they make links, then there's no links to be made. There isn't, you know. But there is an interesting point here with the whole pineal concept. Now, the pineal gland is intriguing in many ways, in the sense that it is the only, there's a couple of undivided things in the brain, but it's the main one that if you take the brain, you take the top off the skull of a dead person, open the brain up, split it apart, you'll find the pineal gland in the center. Okay. And it's very small. And yet there's something strange about it because it takes so much of the blood. It needs to be energy all the time. Okay. Now, what is curious about the pineal gland is that at the 49th day of gestation, it is located at the back of the throat within the womb. The baby, as it develops, it's in the back of the throat. And the pineal gland and the pituitary gland are one single unit called the epiphysis. Okay. Now, the epiphysis then moves from the 49th day of gestation. And anybody who's out there, you know, 49th day of gestation, it's when the spirit is supposed to enter the fetus and everything else as well. So there's a link there. It then starts moving back to the center of the brain. It moves up to the center of the brain, and the pineal gland and the pituitary body split into two separate things. They leave something called Rathke's pouch or Rathke's cleft, which is a little cleft at the back of the throat. Why I'm mentioning this is that if you look up in terms of certain mudras, these are kind of techniques people use to get into altered states of consciousness. There's something called a Kakara mudra. And the Kakara mudra is people in India, and people in the West do this as well, where they train themselves to place the tongue at the back of the throat. So you train yourself to lift your tongue up and link to the back of the throat. So you go into a state of meditation, and then you do this. And people claim that there's a kind of an acidic taste they get. There's this kind of taste at the back of the throat, which sometimes people call it soma, ambrosia, various terms. The question is, this seems to be hallucinogenic, and it seems to facilitate a person moving into an altered state of consciousness. This is intriguing because Rathke's pouch, imagine the scenario. The pineal gland is there supposedly for one purpose, and its purpose is to generate a substance called melatonin. Now, melatonin is the substance that makes you go to sleep at night. It's something that makes you feel drowsy. Now, how the pineal gland in the center of the brain knows that it's getting dark outside is really, really fascinating. It sits above something called the optic chiasma. It's where the optic nerves from both eyes go into the brain, and they cross over at one point to feed the different areas of the brain at the back of the head, the visual cortex. At the point they cross, the pineal gland sits directly above it. Why does it do that? It does it for one reason. The pineal gland is an ossified eye. It's light sensitive, which means it is sensitive to the fact that there is no signals of light going down the optic nerve, which means it knows it's going dark. And when it knows it's going dark, it then starts generating melatonin. Now, within the pineal gland, there's something called pineal sand. They're crystals. These crystals are piezoelectric, which means that they can be stimulated to create electromagnetic energy. Okay? Now, why are they doing this? Well, I think they're doing it for a very good reason. I believe what is taking place is that melatonin, if you look at the chemical makeup of melatonin, it's very similar to another substance, dimethyltryptamine. And with just a few changes of a few of the molecules, the structure you can create from melatonin, DMT, dimethyltryptamine. Now, a guy called Beach Barrett down in Asheville in North Carolina has been working on this with Rick Strassman and the idea of doing the way these chemicals work. Okay, so the chemicals there, they work together. And I think what happens is, as Rick Strassman has said, DMT is our reality modulator. It's what creates out there. It uses the inner visions and it creates this illusion of an external world out there, using probably the holographic principles of the microtubules. Again, I think I'm right in saying I'm the only person on the planet doing this. There may be other writers doing it, but I don't think there are. And if there are, I put my hand up to them and say, you got there first. But, I don't think anybody's quite joining the dots in the same way I am. It's not being vain. It's just a statement of fact. Okay, so the melatonin it then creates DMT, which Beach Barrett calls metatonin, which is endogenous internally generated DMT. I think that is what people taste when they have Kakara Mudra. They're tasting the DMT. Now, if this is the case, this brings forward some very interesting facts. The first one is, if you go and look out in the press, and most people will turn around and say, DMT, yeah, we agree, DMT is in the body, but it's never, ever been found in the brain. And they will make these statements. Why they make them, I don't know. They should do their bloody research, because DMT has been found in the brain of live mammals. A girl called Jimo Borgigin in 2017 at the University of Michigan found DMT in the brain of live rats, which means DMT is a neurotransmitter. It's a neurotransmitter for one reason. It works with something called the trace amine associated receptors in the brain. Okay, the TARS receptors. And they don't know why the TARS receptors exist in the brain. They do now. It works with DMT. Coming full circle now, DMT, when it's taken endogenously, I have a group of friends who are doing real leading edge research at the moment into DMT and DMT entities at Imperial College in London. The guys I work with, these are not, again, people who are just reinforcing each other's ideas. These are postdoctoral researchers. They are neurologists. They're neurochemists, okay? And they're testing this. And one guy, and I probably told you this last time, I keep getting this wrong, don't I? One guy was telling me, who's been on my own podcast, by the way, was telling me that, have I told you this one before on the show, by the way?
No, you have not.
Oh, okay. Get this. And this is where it comes down to the entities. They're taking DMT intravenously under control conditions, under a research project. So it's completely legal. There's lots of them doing it. They're volunteers. He explained to me, he said, and this guy, he's a PhD guy, he's an expert in virtual reality. He's doing some amazing work with virtual reality simulations in terms of what reality is and isn't. You need to get him on the show.
Oh, future of gaming, DMT and virtual reality at the same time.
Well, I'm in my new book. I'll be linking these two together. Believe me. I mean, I've been playing today on my new Oculus system. I'm doing the VR stuff as well. We are creating a VR interpretation of Plato's Cave at the moment.
Amazing.
Watch this space. We're going to be doing this in the original location of Plato's Cave in Greece. My Greek publisher is facilitating this at the moment. This is really exciting news. Okay, so this guy, he takes the DMT intravenously and he finds himself, as you do, shooting out of your body, and he finds himself in what's called the DMT cage. It's this kind of location you find yourself, okay? And he's there. And as he's in this location, this entity with huge black eyes, it's the standard gray, and it comes over to him and it looks him straight in the eyes and it pokes him. And it said, you should not be doing it this way. This is not the way to do it. It then fades back into the darkness. He comes down from the DMT trip and explains to his friends, and he said, that was really weird. This entity really had a go at me saying we're doing this wrongly. 2 weeks later, he goes back, takes the DMT, goes back. He's in the DMT cage. The same entity comes over again, recognized him and said, I told you last time, this is not the way to do it. And as he said to me, this means this entity was independent of him, because if it wasn't, it would be agreeing with him. If it was just a lucid dream and everything, but it wasn't, it was telling him off. and it remembered him, which means it has independence of thought. Okay. Now, if the entities in DMT have independence of thought, what does this tell us about their background? So suddenly, Terence McKenna, the DMT elves, what do they really mean? In Opening the Doors of Perception, and in my latest book about entities, I call them the egregores, okay? These beings are using this in some way to come through. The machine elves, they're part of us because they're joking, but I think that alien abductions, I think, and Whitley Strieber and I have discussed this. You know, Whitley is really intrigued by my hypothesis because, as he said, your hypothesis explains totally the whole principle of what he experienced. Now, again, you probably know Professor Jeff Kripal, who has worked with Whitley Strieber and has written a whole series of fascinating books. Jeff will be, we're under discussions as to whether he will or will not at the moment for reasons I won't go into at the moment, but has volunteered to write the foreword to the new book because he's so intrigued by exactly how I'm smashing through into something quite extraordinary here. And everybody, when they come across my work and read my work, there's this sudden light that goes on. For instance, there is another professor of psychology that's just recently read my first book, then listened to it on Audible, finished it and listened to it again. Because he messaged me and he said, my God, how do I not know about your work? What you're saying is absolutely extraordinary. And it's because I'm comparatively little known. And it's very sad in many ways that I was supposed to be speaking at Contact in the Desert this year and last year, but because of the COVID lockdown, I won't be able to make it, which is really sad. But I'll be involved in we're trying to do it online in some way. This is really important stuff. And it links everything. In the book, I link everything from the work of Aleister Crowley to AWAS, to Strieber and his Greys, right through going back through time, right back to Anunnaki, the role of the Anunnaki, the role of entities in that period, the role of the jinn within Islamic tradition. It all makes sense. It may not look like it's sense, but when you start to drill in, there is linked themes and they are there. And, you know, I think I've twigged it. I know it sounds vain. You know, people who know me know I'm just an enthusiast. But the science backs it up. And the more science that's being discovered at the moment, for instance, do you know that they're actually doing research at the moment to find the pixelation of space?
I heard about that. Yeah.
Craig Hogan at the Perimeter Institute in Canada. They're looking for the pixelation of space. They believe that this is a giant hologram. But not only is it a giant hologram, it's a two-dimensional projection of a three-dimensional surface. This, again, is not madness. This is something that Stephen Hawking, Gerald Tooft, Juan Maldacana, these are names that you may not have heard of, but these are the top thinkers or were the top thinkers in the field. Vlatko Vedrell. Everything is digital. Everything is digital information. It's on and offs. What we think is reality out there isn't. It's information. They've recently discovered that information has mass. So information itself is the creative force. Just like you go into a third-person RPG game or you go into a virtual reality headset, the virtual reality you see in there, I mean, I've just been playing a wonderful game based upon Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. It's absolutely incredible. But you're there. You're there in the environment. When you do virtual reality with a virtual reality headset, with your earphones in and everything else as well, how would you know that this is not a virtual reality simulation in exactly the same way? And the answer is you can't. You've no idea. You don't know. You can't tell. You're in the simulation. Very important point. When people turn around and say, oh, the whole idea of this being a simulation is crazy, clearly have no idea about how neurology works. Clearly have no idea how people call consciousness researchers and consciousness studies people. As I said, everything you are perceiving now is created by your brain inside your brain and presented to you. It's a facsimile of what maybe or maybe not be out there. Now, this is a known fact. This is not, for instance, the way you're seeing now is extraordinary. What's happening is that photons of light are coming off from your computer screen, tiny little point particles that have no mass, by the way. Photon has zero mass and travels only at the speed of light. So from the point of view of a photon, now get this, it's timeless. There is no time for a photon. And it doesn't exist in three-dimensional space because it's too small. It's a point particle. But trillions of these are hitting your eyes now. They're going through your aqueous humor in your eye, and they're hitting your retina at the back of your eye. They are then converted, the signals they are carrying, because that's what they're doing, they're carrying signals. And by the way, they're not the same photons. Photons hit electrons, and when they do, the electron changes its energy state and takes in one photon and spits out another. So whenever you think that you're, say, looking through a window, you're not. The photons you're seeing this side of the window are not the photons that are hitting the other side. That's known science, okay? So whatever the energy is, whatever the imagery is, it then hits your retina. Your retina is postage stamp size and inverted. It has a postage stamp image and it's inverted, and it gets turned into an electrochemical signal. It's not the same as the photon. It gets changed. That then goes back underneath the pineal gland and goes to the darkest part of your brain, right at the back here, okay? And it is there in the visual cortex that it's reassembled again. The signal is then reassembled to give you an image of what is out there. But there's no one-to-one relationship between what is out there and the image that it is creating inside your brain. And the same goes for sound. Sound is created internally. Taste is created internally. It is all created internally. You know, so when people say, whoa, don't be silly. People do not think deep enough. They don't go deep enough down the rabbit hole. When you really start digging deeply, the whole thing, you see the pixelation. It's like looking at an old photograph on a newspaper. The closer you get, you start to see the dots. And then when you see the dots, because get this, latest research is also suggesting that time is quantized. Now, this is extraordinary. It means that every bit of time is not related to every other bit of time. There are gaps between the bits of time, okay? Now, this means that time is not what we seem to think it is at all. Because, of course, we already know that physical matter, there are gaps between them. Energy does not come continually. They've known that since 1900. So there is something really strange about what we think is real and what is not real. Because suddenly we've got the idea that it's all just information. Simulation is the wrong term. Simulation suggests it's copied off something else. But it is something that is far deeper and far more exciting. And the entities are out there somewhere in part of that.
Wow, man. So with what you brought up a minute ago about this information that goes from out there and then we see it, but it has to go through multiple processes and different filters, et cetera, it gets flipped upside down and goes into the back of your head. So there's no direct connection. I thought to myself, there have been descriptions for thousands of years of beings that can shapeshift. And even in ancient India, they talked about the Anu Naga, which were the serpent that shapeshifted into a man. And then recently I was in Utah. I was in a place called Moab, which has got, talk about evidence in stone of a major catastrophe and possibly these egregores and beings. I mean, it's, oh, wow. It's like heaven out there. Actually, it's more like Mars, but so I was out there recently and I found this old petroglyph. And it's called the Intestine Man. If you look it up in Moab, you can just type in Intestine Man in Moab, and it's about 40 feet up off the ground. And if you look at it carefully, it's one of the best petroglyphs I've ever seen as far as details go. I mean, it's like something out of a comic book. And it's, if you look carefully, you'll see a snake inside of a man, and it's as if the snake is shapeshifting into a man. And I'm sure it has some spiritual significance. But the fascinating thing is the Hopi prophet talked about the ant people and how they saved them, and they took them inner earth, and they were the sky people. Ancient Babylon talks about Anu as the sky god, the father of the Anunnaki. Anunnaki in Hopi means ant friends. So what I was wondering if what I was seeing was what the natives saw at that time, where there was actually these beings that saved them, if it was some type of how do you describe it when you have that the
Kundalini.
Yeah, thank you. You don't have to talk about the Kundalini awakening, or was it Anu, man? Was it one of these sky gods? And
this is quite important. In that, in one of my books, I discuss this. Jeremy Narby wrote a very influential book a few years ago about the link between serpents and snakes and dimethyltryptamine. Okay, now I've taken that one step further and arguing that you can link the whole snake thing to DNA, and that what is happening is our DNA itself is communicating with us. And this is why you have the snake symbolism. This is why you have the twin snakes winding around themselves, the caduceus and everything else as well. And it seems to be that in some way, the snake symbolism is meaning our own DNA is communicating with us. Now, if that is the case, then it makes a lot of sense, because of course, what are we? Our physical bodies are in fact carriers for DNA. We exist in order for DNA to continue surviving. As Richard Dawkins argued, in The Selfish Gene, this is what it's about. We are receptacles that happen to have evolved, but it's something deeper than that. There is something within the symbolism of the snakes. Now, again, one of the things that intrigued me a great deal, and in my book, The Infinite Minefield, I discuss it, taking on from Narby and people like Harmer and various other individuals that were down taking ayahuasca in Amazonia. And there's a very famous story, I don't know how famous it is, but it's quite intriguing, is that they were really confused when the Western chemists got down to looking at the constituents of ayahuasca. They were extremely interested, because ayahuasca has a very specific, again, did I discuss this last time?
Not into this much detail. If you did, this is great.
Okay. Ayahuasca is quite an interesting substance. It's a brew. It's brewed over a period of days, and it has two constituent elements to it. It has something called Banisteriopsis caapi, okay, which is a vine, and it's the vine that it's just this vine thing, okay. It's called the vine of God, okay. And the other plant is something called Psychiatra viridas, and Psychiatra viridas contains DMT. It has DMT in its leaves, okay. And what they do is they mix these two together and they make a brew and a tea, and apparently it's filthy tasting, but you drink it and you have ayahuasca experiences. The interesting thing is that if you eat just the Psychiatra viridas leaves, as many as you eat, you will never have a DMT experience, even though it has DMT in it. And it's for a very good reason. When it gets into your stomach, the stomach realizes that there's this substance in there, and it excretes something called an monoamine oxidase. A monoamine oxidase is something that stops the hallucinogenic substance, the DMT, crossing from the stomach into the blood system and into the spinal cord and getting into the brain. It gets trapped in the stomach, okay? So you don't have an experience. However, if you take it with the vine, Banisteriopsis caapi contains something called harmaline, or harmine. And that is known to be an MAO, monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So when you take the two together and it gets into your stomach, the MAO comes out, and immediately the MAO inhibitor that's inside the vine leaves, the vine stops it being effective, which then allows the DMT to then get to your brain, cross the blood-brain barrier, and put you into altered states of consciousness. Now, there are apparently, I've read something like 60, 70,000 different plant species in the Amazon basin. Why did they pick these two of all of them and mix them together? So they did the obvious. They asked the shamans, and the shamans said that many years ago, our shaman ancestors used to shamanic travel. And when they shamanic traveled, they would go and meet entities that would normally be snakes and jaguars and various other things, but regularly snakes. And these entities would talk to them. And the entities said to them, if you want normal people to experience what you experience, and they took them into the jungle in the dream state and pointed out the vine and pointed out the leaves of the Psychiatra viridas and said, put these two together and you will create a window and an opportunity for other people to open the doors of perception. Well, they didn't use that term, but, you know, to go into the world of the shamans. Okay. Now, the chances of this is extraordinary. So clearly, whatever those entities were, they knew what they were doing. They were giving specific information that was used in this world in order to open up facilities whereby they can come through to our world as much as we can go through to theirs. Because when we're in their world, we are party to their world and we can be influenced by them. Now, one of the most fascinating stories was told by an Israeli psychologist called Benny Shannon. And Shannon wrote a wonderful book, well worth reading, get a hold, called The Antipodes of the Mind. And it's a book on DMT and ayahuasca. But he was told a story, or I think Michael Harmer was told this story by an ice cream salesman in the jungle. But this guy was also a shaman. And he told the story and he said, he tells the story, and he said, God had the secret of the universe. And he wanted to keep it a secret, but he didn't know where to hide it because he realized that mankind would evolve and would be intelligent enough to be able to use science to understand the mysteries of the universe. So God thought to himself, where shall I hide the secret? I'll hide it at the bottom of the ocean. Man will never get there. He'll never find it. And then God thought, no, he will invent submarines. He'll be able to get there. I'll place it on the moon. And then he thought, no, man will get spaceships and he'll go to the moon. And then he thought, I know where I'll hide it. I know where I will hide the secret of everything, right in the center of the human brain, the pineal gland.
Boom. Wow. Wow. This is fascinating. Absolutely incredible. And you know, I've got a question here in the chat from Julian, actually. He wanted me to ask you, do you think that when, I'm going to use code here a little bit, when they test you with that thermometer, like right at the third eye, you know, the pineal gland area, they test your temperature, do you think that that has an effect on your actual pineal gland?
That's an interesting point. I don't know. I don't know effectively. Possibly because, you know, it is in that area. But the thing is, it would have to go very deeply in order to do that. So I think probably not. But it's an interesting point because the pineal gland can be affected by so many things that who knows? You know, we do know that there seems to be an issue with calcification. I've never really found full evidence for that suspicion. But I'd argue that calcification possibly can actually make the pineal gland more affected because, of course, calcification is crystals, and crystals we know are piezoelectric, which means it might facilitate it being more effective as a doorway. But no, it's a good point. I don't know is my answer to that.
Okay. And it'll also depend on the type of crystals. Maybe there's certain crystals that have the opposite effect, that short circuit more, you know, depending on I just got the chills because Julian said in the chat, I'm glad you brought this up. He said, Rex, you got told off too on Salvia divinorum. And that's right. When I took Salvia divinorum for a shamanic experience, I did it a few times, but two in particular, man, it's changed my life. Like it really freaked me out. And this one time I took it, and for about a minute, you can't do anything, dude. Like you can't even move. You're like, you know. And I was literally screaming, man. I was so scared. I'm like, freaking out, screaming on the ground. And behind me is Bhava Chakra. This guy right here, this is a modern version of the Bhava Chakra. It's like the wheel of,
Oh, yes. Like the Kali chakras. Yeah, the wheel.
Yeah, it's the wheel of life and all that. And it's got the different cycles and the different locations, like the Diva realm, the Hell realm. And so I took it and I started to go, like, it was almost like I was going on the will. And time seems like, when you're on it, 1 second seems like it could be forever. Like time, you kind of lose track of time. It freaks you out. Like you think you're stuck in this pit and you're not getting out and you're there forever. But I was told, when I did it, I thought like I saw these guardians, or I felt these guardians. And I even remember seeing a spirit walk into the room, and I thought it was a person, but it was actually a spirit, or some, I don't know. But anyway, there are these entities when I did it, and I kept going down and like the real depths, and I felt like I was going into hell. But then I would come back out of it, and it was kind of exciting. It almost felt like a ride, but it felt like a will. And I remember these beings, and one of them I think could have even been my grandma, but I call them my guardians, because they told me when I did it, they said, don't come back here. Like in this trip, they're like, don't come back here. And I'm like, okay, I won't come back. And I was starting to come out of it. And then I would start to go down again. And I'm like, but it's so much fun. I'm like, don't come back here. Don't come back here. And to make a long story short, I wasn't, I thought, am I going to do this again, or am I not going to do it again? Several months later, I decided I'm going to do it again. And remember GLP? Well, the Godlike Productions, I used to get on that website a lot when they had the chat. Like you could just go in there and you could talk your feelings, and people like, well, I think this different stuff. I went on chat that night before I did it. And there was this guy on the chat that sounded like he was mentally retarded almost. And I felt really bad for him. I could tell something was up, and people were making fun of him, and it was pissing me off. And he made a comment about how like out of the blue, he brought this up. I didn't bring it up. He said that he was like that because he took Salvia Divinorum. And he used to make six figures, happy family, happy life, super smart. He did that, and it messed him up. So he's like, now I live with my parents. I lost my wife. So, and that was the same night I was going to do that again. After these things told me, these beings or guardians told me not to. I'm getting the chills just thinking about it. And then months later, I decided to do it again, go on the chat. Out of the blue, this guy's on there that's messed up. And then I'm like, no, I'm definitely not doing this again. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the clue in Divinorum, salvia is, again, one of these hallucinogenic substances, these entheogens. And of course, the technical term for these is entheogens, which means God within. And it's putting you in touch with a deeper part of yourself, what I would call the daemon. And when you do this, the daemon will communicate with you, whichever is the most effective way to get the message across. So I'd argue that it will manifest itself as your grandmother, your grandfather. When near-death experiences, it manifests itself as the being of light. It will manifest itself as, in some cases, Elvis Presley, even in terms of near-death experiences. Whatever it is that will make the person feel what is being said has importance. Now, with Divinorum, it's fascinating. The most fascinating substance I'm being told at the moment is 5-MeO-DMT. And 5-MeO is a completely different experience to normal DMT. And I know about half a dozen people at least. And there's Dr. Martin, I can't think of his name now. He lives in Oregon. He wrote a fascinating book on it. Martin Ball, Dr. Martin Ball. And what it does is it, unlike DMT, which takes you to alternate states of reality and you meet entities, with 5-MeO-DMT, you become the universe. You attune into the collective unconscious of the universe or humanity or whatever. Now, one of the developing points I'm making, I contributed a chapter. A guy called Kunji Mapson wrote a book a few years or facilitated a book called Pandeism, an anthology. And I'm really coming to the conclusion that we are, as Bill Hicks said, one single consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. And there are levels of awareness as you go through, and the entheogens facilitate that moving into the greater consciousness. There are levels of consciousness, and we get broader and broader the higher we go in terms of, until we get to Brahman or whatever we want to call it. And, as Bill Hicks said, that we are one consciousness experiencing self subjectively. It is something that Philip K. Dick talk about. Various other writers have talked about. And of course, this is the central, I would say, the central secret of a lot of esoteric traditions. They turn around and say, even Christianity says it, look for Jesus within, look for God within, look for the Buddha within. What you're looking for is yourself, but it's not yourself, it's your higher self. And I would argue that I call ourselves eidolons. You and I are eidolons. I would say that 90% of the people listening to this program are eidolons. We are the sprites within the computer game. We get born and we die. The game is switched on, the Big Bang, if you want. The game is switched on and we awaken. We are born. We then live within it. And at the end of our lives, we die and we're switched off. But our game player, who's the guy the other side of the screen, the guy outside of linear time, the guy that's in orthogonal time, the real you and the real me is your game player. And I call that the daemon. And the daemon is the game player. And the daemon is the being that is it's your guardian angel. It's the person that makes you have precognitive experiences. It's the thing that warns you. It's the thing that makes you recognize things when you have deja vu experiences. It's guiding you through. Now, people have said to me, well, if the daemon knows it's lived your life again, why does it allow you to make mistakes? And it does it for a very good reason. Because it knows that mistake may seem a mistake now, but in 5 or 10 years' time, it's positioning you to get you into a position you need to be in order to fulfill one of the avenues of what Jorge Borges called the Garden of the Forking Paths. Jorge Borges was a Gnostic Argentinian writer. And he argued, we're in a garden of the forking paths. Every outcome of every decision you can make is already programmed out there. I've discussed this in my books. In my new book, I'm going to go in there to even greater detail. Again, this is not me talking about it. It's quantum physics. We know that this is the case. You either take the route of the many worlds interpretation of Hugh Everett III, or you take the implicate and explicit orders, or you take Stephen Hawking's top-down hypothesis, or you take John Kramer's interactional analysis. But they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying that what we think is time is not time in the same way. And everything is out there in potentiality. We collapse the wave function of this particular reality. I'm collapsing my wave function, you're collapsing yours, and we're overlapping at the moment. But our wave functions then go off in different directions. So inside the program is the outcome of every possible decision you can make and every other possible person's decision. So Rex, say your parents could have decided to have emigrated to Uruguay, and you could have been brought up in Uruguay. You could have been brought up in a universe where all these things are possible. In fact, in one universe or other, you'll have been born in every country on the planet. You'll have also been born in different years and at different lives. And it's incredible. And it goes back through time. So all your parents and your grandparents all make decisions which get your parents in places. And I argue that this is a huge swathe of information, all of which melds together to mean that every outcome of every decision you can make comes true in one universe or another. And your daemon literally is playing the game of your life, knowing that all these outcomes are out there. And all it will know is the games it's played in the past. It might have played your life game 10 times, 20 times, but there will be a point where it knows you died last time. And it will try and avoid that. And it will help you avoid that. And when it does that, it then is in a position, it's now playing a new part of the game that it's never played before. So it can't guide you. And this is why when you get older, you get less deja vus. It's a known fact that as you get older, less and less deja vu experiences. Children get them all the time. And the reason being is a simple one. Nobody's explained this. I have. It's a simple explanation. As you get older, there will be a point where you died last time. It's inevitable. And when you then get past that point, you don't have any past life memories. You don't remember what you did last time. So deja vus cease until you start getting elderly. And when you start to get old, what happens is the memories are starting to regurgitate and picking it up from the 0 point field. Your memories are picking up from the information field, the quantum vacuum, if you want, picks up the information. And you start to remember your past lives and your past life. You know, how many times do you hear elderly people suddenly saying, my memories of my childhood are coming back to me. Things I had forgotten are coming back to me. And it's because your brain is preparing you to go back and live your life again. It's getting you ready to go back. This is what Alzheimer's is doing. It's programming people to get ready to go back and live your life again. You get reincarnated as you, not as somebody else were on the planet. You get reincarnated as you, but you get reincarnated before you die. And this is the important point. You know, you mentioned about time dilation, and when you were taking Salvin Divinorum, time dilated. Imagine that time dilates at the point of death. And we know it does. We know it does. And I know why it does. It's a release in the brain of something called glutamate. And the glutamate actually expands time, okay? It's stress related. If time expands, what does it expand into? Well, imagine when you had that experience, you could have been away for days, weeks, months, years in that state. But for somebody talking to you, watching you, it's just 3 minutes. But for you, it could be a whole lifetime. So you could be in a state of somebody watching you die, but as they watch you die, you're in different time spaces. You can, in the final seconds of your life, have a whole lifetime again. Now, don't people say near-death experiences? You know, I used to be a professional member of the International Association of Near-Death Experiences, and my first academic paper was published by them. And the idea is, in those final seconds, people turn around and say, my whole life flashed before my eyes. I saw it like a video. I saw it like a hollow set of holographic images. And they were all there, and I was experiencing everything in that moment. Again, this is in a movie, the Tesseract sequence in the movie Interstellar, where he looks back at the life of his daughter and he sees it in 3D and all these different areas. This was what happens at death. So what happens is we go back and we're reborn. And we start as an Eidolon. But this time our daemon knows. And I'd argue in the film Groundhog Day, you know, Danny Rubin, when he wrote that, you know, Danny and I have discussed this, you know, and Danny gave my copies of my first book to all his friends at Harvard because he said, this guy has done the science of Groundhog Day. The idea is that Connors is a daemon and an Eidolon. He's a daemon existing as an Eidolon. So the Eidolon wouldn't know what happens each day, but Connors does because he's become an avatar. Because I believe there are people that can come back who've lived their lives many times who come back to help us. And this in Hindu tradition is an avatar. It's somebody who comes back, or a bodhisattva, somebody who comes back to help. You know, again, J.B. Priestley wrote a fascinating play called I Have Been Here Before in 1937. And in this play, he discusses a character who comes back. Now, these tropes are in so many movies, so many films at the moment. You know, people are contacting me every day. And I've somebody message me from someone to say, have you seen this movie? It's your theory. Well, I believe it's because people are waking up to my theory. It's just that people are not aware that this obscure limey has written this book, not in 2006, wrote it originally in 2000, that all these movies are now talking about. You know, I've proof that I was writing about this years ago. And I do the science. It's just that the writers of these films don't know. And one day it's going to crack through. One day somebody's going to come along, pick up my books and go, bloody hell, Jesus Christ, this is everything. This explains everything. My model that I'll be putting out in my new book, Cheating the Ferryman, can explain virtually everything. I mean, everything from out-of-body experiences to near-death experiences to lucid dreaming to remote viewing, to alien encounters, to UFO encounters. The whole thing is in there. And I'm the only writer doing this. There's other people writing. I know there's this new, which is driving me slightly crazy. There's this new Netflix series that everybody's going crazy about called Afterlife. I don't know if you've heard about it. People are going mad.
My mom told me to watch that, actually.
Oh, they're going mad about it. You know, they're saying it's the most amazing thing ever. Watch that and then get hold of a book I wrote with Irvin Laszlo 7 years ago.
Oh, I got to send that to my family. Yeah, that sounds like
7 years ago. We wrote that book that TV series and the writer that wrote that it's based upon. Now, I don't believe she read our book, but we're already there. I get it all the time. I'll get people writing books and they say, I've made this incredible discovery, like, you know, the pineal gland stuff. And people go, wow, 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 isn't it really great, you know? And I'm sitting there going, Been there, done it, got the brownie point. Why aren't you listening to me? Why aren't you reading my stuff? And I know it's because my daemon doesn't want me to get known yet. There's a reason. And it's only in the last 2 or 3 days I've discovered why. I can't tell you why at the moment because I don't want to talk about it. But suddenly my daemon has suddenly shown me why things have happened to me the way they have, the way my work isn't well known and has not been well known. It's going to become well known. It's going to become hugely well known if certain things take place that look like they're going to. And what is happening now is that more and more people from around the world are contacting me with their experiences. People, for instance, I write a lot about temporal lobe epilepsy. I write a lot about migraine auras. I write a lot about schizophrenia, autism. We had, for instance, as a young girl, we had on my own podcast, we had a young girl called Becky Sharrock from Australia. Now, one of the things that I argue is that we have the capacity to remember every single thing of our lives. It's just that the brain can't recall it because we need those memories when we relive our lives again. And I call that demonic consciousness. Becky has what's called highly superior autobiographical memory. She remembers every single thing that has happened in her life. And we tested her on live, YouTube live. We tested this girl. She didn't know we were going to do it. Halfway through the show, I turned around to her and I said, okay. And I turned around to my assistant, Sarah, and I said, Sarah, do you have a copy do you have all the volumes of the Harry Potter series? And because I know this girl loves Harry Potter. And I said, can you take out one of the books and pick one of the books at random, pick a page at random and read the first line and see if Becky can complete it? She did. Unbelievable. Literally 3 words my assistant read, and then Becky continued with it for about 2 minutes, literally saying the words that were in the book. And this was on live YouTube, Facebook. Just extraordinary. Now, if people can remember and she does this because she's autistic. She does this because her brain works in a particular way. And in one of my books, I do the neurology of autism, why it is that autistic people can open their doors of perception wider. I call it the Huxleyan spectrum. And I worked at a school for children who had autism and epilepsy as a consultant, not as a consultant, medical consultant, but as a management consultant. And the people that worked in these homes for the kids said the kids were uncanny. They said, we see precognition happening all the time. We regularly see precognition. We regularly see children being able to see things that are happening the other side of the school, the other side of the campus. I spoke to one of the psychiatrists at the place, professional psychiatrist, and he said, "Oh no, we know these kids are psychic." And I said, "But how do you explain that?" He said, "We can't, but we know they are." And I said, "Why don't you write papers about this?" And he said, "I can't do that. If I wrote a paper saying that autistic children were psychic, I would lose my ability to be a psychiatrist. They'd ban me. I'd be considered a loony." And these people, I have scientists, I have doctors, I have surgeons coming to me all the time saying the extraordinary things they see and the extraordinary things they have discovered. And all of them, without exception, turn around to me and say, "I can only talk about this after I've retired." I'll give you an example of how bad this is. A guy called Brian Josephson. I met Brian a few years ago at a Scientific and Medical Network group at a talk, funnily enough, about David Bohm, a thing about David Bohm and his work. And Brian Josephson is, I think, one of the few British living Nobel Prize winners for physics. He invented something called the Josephson junction. Okay. Now, about 7 or 8 years ago, the British were going to be bringing out stamps to commemorate the living people who had won the Nobel Prize. Brian Josephson is a living Nobel laureate in physics. Do you know that they didn't do a stamp on him for one reason? And the reason was he was researching telepathy. And they didn't like it. Even though he's a quantum physicist and is one of the most astounding brains in this country. He was denied having a stamp. I still don't know whether the stamp eventually came out or not. I don't think it did. because of his interests. And I hear this again and again and again. But there are a new group of scientists coming up now. The old guys are dying off because, as one famous scientist said, science beliefs do not change by people changing their minds. It means the old gods start dying. And there's new people coming up now. There's young guys. I'm now getting people in their 30s, 20s and 30s approaching me about my work. These are all postdoctoral researchers. And suddenly I'm becoming flavor of the month. Suddenly it's, what do you think about this? I mean, I've been offered a place to complete my PhD. I've been debating it. I'm thinking about it. And I think, no, it's probably not worth it at my age. You know, it's not worth it for me. But it would be something I'd have liked to have done many years ago. But if I had done it, I'd have been off in academia. And if I'd been off in academia, I could not be allowed to do this. But there are great researchers, like, for instance, there's one guy that I'm really working closely with at the moment called Immense Baruch, Professor Immense Baruch, who is a university professor in Canada. His work is extraordinary. His work is absolutely mind-blowing. This guy is hyper intelligent. You know, if anybody turned around and said, oh, he's not a scientist, this guy is. This guy has also got a master's degree in maths just because he wanted to understand quantum physics. And he did 2 years of maths, quantum physics maths PhD to understand the maths. And he's completely in line with everything I'm saying. You know, he keeps saying, you know, we're singing from the same hymn sheet. This is really extraordinary stuff. And this is it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Let me ask a question about what you had brought up a little while ago when I told you about that experience. And you said that you thought it could be my daemon, and it very well could be. But why not my grandma?
It's possible because, of course, the argument is, and my hypothesis is, that it all happens before you die. So people do die and they move on. And it's when they move on, it's where they go. Now, for my worldview, I find, and in the end of my book, I wrote it up again today, actually, I do a discussion of the various alternative afterlife scenarios. You know, you die and you go to heaven. No, you die and nothing happens. You just die and you're gone. Then I say the second one is you die, you go to heaven, you meet Jesus or whatever it is, and you live forever playing a harp under the clouds. Third one is you get reincarnated as somebody else, somewhere else on the planet. Or the fourth one, my cheating the ferryman hypothesis. And each one of them, I point out the logistic inconsistencies with each one of them. For instance, your grandmother, you saw her as your grandmother. But if she's dead, how is she reborn? Is she reborn as a young woman? What age is she when she's reborn? If she's re-embodied, as some religions believe, and lives in paradise, she will have a physical body of some description. So what age is she reborn? How long do people exist in this world, this magical world? Do they just, you know, in early Christian times, it was just looking at God for all eternity, and that was enough to make you happy. Does that work now? Does the idea that you can't communicate with living people, all these kind of things? So I would argue that probably there is a part of you that remains, part of your eidolon still lurks around within the simulation, and that can communicate in certain ways. But it's not quite the same idea of my grandmother is just there in eternity and she's waiting for Rex to call her so she can pop down, and she's sitting there waiting. Oh, this is when he's going to take the salvia. I need to be there now. Because she's in a different kind of time scale, okay? The problem then is that if people who believe in the idea of life after death and you go to heaven and everything else, you then have a problem with people who believe in reincarnation. Because, of course, you're then reincarnated, but you're reincarnated as somebody completely different with no memories of your past life. Now, my argument here is, how does that achieve anything? If I die tomorrow and I'm reborn in Nepal as somebody else with no memories of my past life, what have I learned? I've spent a whole life of learning here, loving people, feeling pain, feeling anguish and everything else, which is a learning experience. You are here to learn. But I'm then reborn as somebody else with no memories of what I did before. So how can that be anything? So it means that I just live a series of lives, none of which are linked, none of which are iterative, none of which I learn anything from, because I forget it all, okay? So for me, there has to be some kind of continuity here. There has to be something that carries these ideas forward. Now, I'd argue it's the daemon within my idea of you get reborn as yourself over and over again. Because I then have the problem with reincarnation. Different belief systems say reincarnation happens immediately, or as the Indians, the Native Americans do in the Pacific Northwest, or you get reborn in a local village about 3 years later, or you get reborn somewhere else in the world, or you get reborn as an insect, or depending upon the karma system, you get reborn in higher or lower castes. But these are all conflicting and completely different interpretations of what reincarnation is. So when people say, you know, well, all these millions of people believe in reincarnation, they believe in very precisely different forms of reincarnation. They can't all be right, and they definitely cannot sit in with the Judeo-Christian Islamic worldview that you go to paradise. You can't go to paradise and be reborn again and again and again. It doesn't work. So they conflict each other. And to me, what makes logical sense? To me, it makes logical sense to learn by your mistakes. And you can only learn by your mistakes if you remember your mistakes. I know I've made so many mistakes in my life that I've learned from, that I don't want to make those errors again. I want something to warn me next time, to say, for God's sake, don't hurt this person, or don't go there with this, because this is how it's going to work out. It's going to end up painfully. Wouldn't it be great if you had a little voice in your head saying, don't do that? Because we do, don't we? The amount of times you meet somebody and your heart flutters and you go, my God, how do I know this person? I know her and she's going to be so important to me. I'm going to give up everything for her. I just know it. And then there are other people, you have this, woo, there's something not right about this person, but you carry on and you end up with a disaster. I've got people who've written to me proving it, lad, over and over. Is there life after death? Cheating from over and over again. People have told me their daemons tell them that they're their own self. They say, I am you in your future. I'm you looking back over your life now. A friend of mine, Myron Dial, who is a temporal lobe epileptic artist in California, read his work, see my interviews with him. This guy is living proof of what I'm talking about. This works. And it means that you have this ability to learn from your mistakes and get it right. And I argue that at the end of that second life, you live it again and again and again. You don't live the same life. People accuse me of this all the time. They say, Anthony Peake says you live the same life over and again. That's Nietzsche. I'm not applying Nietzsche's ideas. It's a spiral. You're going up, you're getting better. It's more Ouspensky. And the idea is that you move and you learn like you do when you play a computer game, isn't it? You play the game, and each time you get better at it. And this is the whole concept of the Eastern ideas of learning and growing. And you learn from your mistakes. And in the end, you live the perfect life. And when you do that, you're given the choice, I believe, I can't prove this because it's not scientific, but I believe what happens is you're then given the choice of going back again if you want, or moving on to die, because of course all this has happened in the final seconds of your life. Then you're allowed to die, and then you either go to heaven or you get reincarnated or whatever people believe you do. But it works. You know, I do not discuss life after death. So for me, I don't need to prove that there's another bodily existence. My theory, you need your body and you need your brain functioning in order for it to work. And of course, your brain is functioning because you're still alive. So I don't have to justify what critics normally say is there's no scientific evidence that there's life after death, because how could it be? Your brain isn't functioning. And I love doing that because people don't read my books and then decide to have a go at me. And I can turn around and say, yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree. I can't prove that, but I can prove that when somebody's dying, that something's going on in the brain. Jimo Borgigin did a series of experiments with live rats where, unfortunately, they killed the rats, or the rats were dying. When the rats were dying, that soon after they died, there was a massive judder of brain activity. It was the near-death experience. It was the past life review, even for a rat. So I believe that this makes sense. It doesn't contravene any religious beliefs whatsoever, but it's found in Gnosticism. My daemon model, if you look into all mystical traditions, Gnosticism, Sufism, the Kabbalah, various other belief systems, human duality of consciousness, It's in virtually every single secret society in the world. I know because there are people in secret societies that have told me this. What was Lester Crowley trying to find? He was trying to find his own higher self. That's what he was doing. The Thelemic tradition, the tradition of Enochian magic. Enochian magic is trying to raise up entities, bring entities forward. And I believe this is where, again, the entities and my daemons sort of start to mix in together in some way. And I'm not quite sure how it works yet, but we're working on this as to how to do this. We're also working on an experiment to actually prove the existence of entities, and that entities are mind created, but can become independent of human consciousness. We're actually planning to do an experiment on this. We're planning to recreate something called the Philip experiment, which took place in the early 1970s in Toronto. And we're going to have a group of people create a mind-formed entity, what I call an egregore, what you could call a tulpa. And we're going to then have that group mentally transfer that entity to another group of mediums elsewhere in the country and see if they pick it up in some way. Because non-local communication, we think it's a possibility. And we're working on this, and we'll hopefully get funding for it. Again, we've got a lot of academics interested in this one. Serious academics like Dr. David Luke, who's one of the world's experts in DMT and everything else. These guys are really interested in what we're trying to do.
Oh man, that's awesome. That made me excited and want to try something like that with League Project. Hey everybody, let's make an egregore that will save the world. We'll turn it into a unicorn and it will release rainbows all over the world, and everybody will be happy, and it will eliminate politics. Let's make a unicorn that completely gets rid of poles of ticks. That's my kind of unicorn right there, buddy. No more politics. Love it.
I'm with you on that one.
Dude, This is awesome. I'm like taking notes as you're talking. I've written down a whole page, actually this big page of notes. I would like to finish this up on a super awesome note. So the age of Aquarius, you brought something up a minute ago that you said, look, my daemon is preventing me from reaching this level of exposure right now on the work. And I think it might have something to do with the age of Aquarius and this transition into everything being revealed, because the club that we're not a part of, that we don't want to be a part of, I mean, they're the ones that say what science is. They're the ones that say what religion is. They're the ones that tell you what's right and what's wrong on the news. And clearly your exposure of telekinesis, telepathy, mind formations, life after death, they don't want us to know about this because that takes away their power, in my humble opinion, some of them.
I'm very much of an opinion, as a historian, in the cock-up theory of history. I believe that everybody's clueless. All of us are clueless. None of us got any bloody idea what we're doing. And the politicians are just as clueless as everybody else. I mean, I would like to, in many ways, it's almost security to believe that somehow, somewhere, somebody knows what's going on and they're planning it all and they have an ulterior plan. However evil it may sound, it's better than actually thinking that it's complete and utterly out of control and nobody has a bloody clue. And I think that's even more terrifying, because I believe that's the case. I mean, people just don't know what they're doing. We elect politicians, but they have no idea. They don't know what they're doing. They're terrified. As soon as they get into power, they've got to play politics. They've got to play to the right or the left wings or wherever, and to me, change is coming, and change has to come when people start. I think if everybody started to realize that we are all one single consciousness, and that what I do to you in some way damages me, I think that's when it will change. And I think what we're trying to do is to get that across to people, to say that everybody's just terrified, scared. They don't know what the hell they're doing. And it's scary. But we at the moment, because of every generation, whatever they are, I can't think what the term is, but it's called the something paradox. And it's every single generation believes that their science has got it. Every generation believes that they are the pinnacle of evolution, that, we're all so cool and we're just about there for understanding things. Now, the chances statistically of that being the case is highly unlikely. just because of history. So it's unlikely that we are any better than anybody else in terms of having ultimate answers. But having said that, I would argue that, for instance, in terms of my daemon and my ideas, I'm 67 in April, so I'm getting on. I don't know how much time
you're
left.
67?
I'm 67 in April.
Wow.
Yeah.
Looking right on, man. I was thinking like 53, 54. You're doing something right. Hello.
I don't know what. But anyway, so the thing is, I don't have that many years left before I start going round again in the whole spiral in the Kali chakra, and everything else. But I don't know where I was going with that. Senile moment, it does happen.
That was my fault. I threw in a pattern.
Yeah, sorry. So the idea that we have all the answers, I think, is the thing. That's right. My daemon. Based on thinking, had I written my book in my 30s or my 40s, I would have been in a position whereby I probably would have earned far more money from the book, because these days, even when you're published as I am, which is by a proper publisher who distribute and pay you fees and pay you in advance, you still earn next to nothing. Okay. But I would have earned far more money, but people wouldn't have got it. People only now will get the nuanced arguments of what I'm saying. Like, for instance, over Christmas, one of the major sellers was the new Oculus independent VR headset. More people using that, more people will then understand the analogies I'm using in terms of VR, in terms of how the science is progressing. 20, 30, 40 years ago, the science hadn't advanced enough for me to find the papers I need in order to reinforce my hypothesis. Because again, I'll reinforce it. There'll be people out there thinking, oh, this guy's just delusional. I know, I get it all the time, and people turn around and they go, oh, it's just crap. I always say to people, just go to my books, go to the back. You will find hundreds of references to academic articles. You read them and you come to your own conclusion. I'm not here. I'm not a guru. I'm not channelist from anywhere. If somebody comes up with ideas and somebody tells me that there's been this paper published that completely discredits what you're saying, that's fine. I have no problem at all, because I'm after truth. I'm not after trying to prove something. I didn't start this thinking, oh, this whole cheating the ferryman thing, I'll now write a book to find out what it is. I didn't start it that way. The book was about an explanation of deja vu. And that's where I started. And it was only from there that the whole cheating the ferryman concept came out. So this is not what I'm after. I'm after us collectively understanding, because we're all, if we're one consciousness experiencing itself sort of subjectively, we're all helping each other. And in my little group of researchers, this is what we feel. We back each other up. We support each other in the writing of our books and everything else as well, because this is the way it should be. But it does mean that now is the time. I'm not into astrology or anything else. I'm not into the whole 2012 stuff. I'm not into the whole 2021 stuff, because I think you set yourself up to get shot down. You do that, you make predictions. The minute you do that, you're in trouble. And again, when my sociology degree that I did, the arguments there, I did the sociology of religion, the sociology of apocalyptic and millenarian religious movements. And the one thing we do know with any exception, all these groups that make these bland predictions always end up revising them, because they're always wrong. There'll be one statistically you'll be right by sheer chance, because that's going to happen. But the time does seem to, right? People are thinking in different ways. And I think the COVID epidemic is really focusing people to be thinking about, what do we mean by viruses? I mean, for instance, in the new book, I'll be discussing how close it is now that wave particle duality, where subatomic particles, and they're not subatomic anymore, we've got big molecules now. The last one was 600 atoms, goes through one slit in goes through both slits at the same time in the twin slit experiment, and is reduced by the act of observation of a conscious mind. It's big molecules. These are now about 1/10 of the size of viruses. I believe that in the next few years, we will discover that viruses are brain created in exactly the same way that subatomic particles are. When that happens, we're going to have something quite interesting going on. Because the whole thing of the twin slit experiment is, and this is hard science, a molecule like a buckyball, before it is measured is a statistical wave. It does not exist. It comes into existence at the moment it is measured. That is fact. That's been known since the 1920s. But the general public doesn't know it. And the general public doesn't know it because, my God, the balloon goes up. 1981, a guy called Alain Aspect and a guy called Alain Aspect and two assistants, Roger and Dalibard, did an experiment at the University of Paris Institute of Optics, where they proved something called the superposition and two particles. They proved it. It's been proved, and it's been proved time and time and time again. That was the greatest experiment in the history of science. I will guarantee that a vanishingly small amount of people know about this. I'll guarantee a vanishing small amount of people know about the ongoing model called the holographic universe model, that this is a simulation. I'll guarantee they think it's just Elon Musk and a load of nutters. It's not. It's serious science. There's serious research being going on to this. Also, the ideas of a guy called, as I mentioned earlier, Anton Zeilinger at the University of Vienna. The stuff he's doing is extraordinary. We're talking now about quantum computing. Google are now designing a quantum computer. This is because the computing is being done in alternate universes. People don't grasp this. This is what quantum computing is. Quantum computing is using the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics to actually do the calculations in billions of different universes. This is again fact. This is the real deal. You know, we are at the edge of a complete change in how we see reality, how we see ourselves and everything else. But we still have scientists, particularly biologists, who are still stuck and saying, no, 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 that's solid. This is what is really solid. It's not. It really isn't. You know, and it's far more interesting than any kind of wacky, ooey, new age stuff. It's far more exciting. Just go to the science. You don't need to go to the new age stuff. Go to new age, go to scientists who are also writing books on the new age. You know, there are scientists out there who are really writing some interesting stuff. And I am dying, absolutely dying to engage the people, the Michael Shermers of this world, the Brian Coxes of this world. I just want to debate with them. I really, really genuinely do, because I will use their science against them. They always put up people who really don't know the science, or make claims that I talk to dead people, or I can get out my body and go and look at something. They're easy targets. People like me are not easy targets. And that's why you don't hear about people like me, because we're dangerous. We're dangerous because we're actually doing their science and pointing out the emperor's new clothes and saying, actually, you're naked. You don't know what you're talking about. You pretend, like Brian Cox, famous English scientist. He's stood up and he makes statements about ESP and it's all nonsense, and ghosts and life after death, it's all nonsense. I mean, he came out recently and said, you know, that life after death can't happen because once the body's dead, the body's dead. You know, I agree with him. He's right. But my concept is a little different. But he wrote a book with Jeff Forshaw, the scientist I told you about, that I had coffee with, about the electrons, knowing the other electrons in the universe. Both of them wrote a book together. And the sub-headline of this book was, everything that can happen will happen. No, everything that can happen does happen. Because they know. They know that everything is already out there in an information field. And we collapse the wave function of the particular information field that's following our particular worldview. It's like solipsism, but it's not. It's kind of elements of that. And my new book is going to be all about this. My problem is actually getting all the information together in a 380 word book, 380 page book. That's going to be my challenge. But, you know, and the evidence I've got evidence of precognition that is irrefutable. At the moment, I'm working with a guy who goes into lucid dream states. And when he does, he sees things and he brings them back and does drawings. 2 or 3 things that he's done recently, including today. Something happened today whereby he did a drawing a couple of days ago. And it happened today with myself and one of my research associates. The thing he saw, that he drew, appeared. somewhere else. He was seeing what we were going to see in our own future. You know, and there's no question about these are, this is accurate. I had one guy I know, have I told you about Graham Nichols and his precognitive out-of-body experience?
I don't remember that.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes, so we need to finish soon. But Graham Nichols, quite famous. Look him up. I have so much respect for Graham. He does the science, but he's had, since a child, he's had out-of-body experiences where he's actually seen things in different locations in hypnagogic states. And Graham contacted me because my book on the out-of-body experience, which was called The Out-of-the-Body Experience, I argued something called the intrasomatic model, that out-of-body experiences, you go inward. You don't go outward out there in three-dimensional space. You go inwards and you see things. And he contacted me, he said, yes, I agree with you to a certain extent, but I have had experiences where I see things that are out there that come true. And he gave me this description. Now, again, if anybody's interested in this, go onto YouTube, just put in Anthony Peake, Graham Nichols, because I interviewed him on the location where this happened, okay? He was doing a lecture course. He was lecturing people. Sorry, you just...
No, I'm showing off your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
No, it's my fault.
Sorry.
I hit the subscribe. I wanted to show people so they could go to your YouTube channel. This is your YouTube channel. And then folks, make sure you hit the subscribe button and then make sure you hit the bell because you have to get the bell for the notifications. That way you get access to the latest shows. Sorry about that.
That's really great because all the interviews I've done are all up there and there's some great stuff there. But,
yeah.
Okay. So just explaining then, he was giving this lecture and he suddenly blacked out. He felt himself blacking out. Blacks out and he comes to and he's in a jungle. He feels the heat around him and everything else. He's got high plants around him. He pushes the plants aside and he steps out and he's standing in the corner of Old Compton Street and Wardour Street in Soho in London. And he said, I'm standing there going, what's happening? And he could hear voices in the distance. And the voices were the people in the lecture theatre saying, Graham, are you okay? And he could hear them like they were up in the sky. And then he said, I looked down and a young kid ran past me and I felt the air displacement as the kid went past him. And he said he looked down the street. And as he looked down the street, he saw an explosion halfway down the street. And a pub just explodes and the people come staggering out covered in blood. You know, it's awful. And then suddenly he finds himself rising up and he's coming to in the lecture theatre. And he turned around and he said and he's got about 6 or 7 witnesses to this who've got sworn affidavits on this. And he turned around and said, there's going to be a terrorist attack in Soho. And he gave the location of where he saw the terrorist attack. That was in December 1999. It was December the 3rd or the 4th. 10 days later, there's a bomb attack at a pub called the Admiral Duncan. It was a gay pub in Soho. About 6 people were killed. There was a nail bomb. It's what he saw. No question, no doubt whatsoever. The only way that a critic can argue that is coincidence. Come on. You know, in a court of law, you know, if that's the kind of thing you want as proof, any court of law would never convict anybody if that was the case. Now, to me, that was extraordinary. And again, that is on there and it discusses it. Check it out. It's really, really good. And Graham describes it with me in the location and he points the distance. And then again, it's on my YouTube site.
Oh, man, I got to listen to that. And the way you described the voices sounded like they were coming from the sky.
Yeah, amazing. Now, again, all of the things I've talked about, all the people I've talked about, Myron Dial, for instance, the TLE artist, he's on my YouTube channel. He's been interviewed by me on 2 or 3 occasions. The young lady who remembers everything in her life, she was on my show 2 weeks ago. Okay. You know, these are all there, all the data research. There's about 60 shows in terms of all the people I talk about. You know, for instance, in my next Monday, I'm interviewing a guy called Bill Murtha. Bill had the most extraordinary near-death experience, dying of hypothermia in the sea off Dawlish in the south coast of England. He met his daemon. His daemon spoke to him. He had a past life review. He went back into his own past. When he was in his own past, he found himself running across the street as a kid. He gets hit by a car. He then remembered that it was an incident that happened when he was about 6 or 7 years of age. Then, poof, he's then looking down at a woman's leg. And a woman's looking down at her leg and she's got her stockings on. And she's got a ladder in her stockings and she's fiddling around with it and she's looking down. Then she looks up and he realizes it's a woman in a car and she's driving and he sees a kid run across. Bang. He felt all the pain that it was the woman that hit him. in the accident. And he said he felt all her pain, all her horror of what happened. I'm interviewing him. Believe me, you've got to watch this one, because the way he was saved and was sent out the water is unbelievable. This was quite a big case, not how he was saved, but the case was on British television. There was a TV series called 999 with a guy called Michael Burke, and it featured in that, but it doesn't discuss the really weird ending to what happened, and we'll be discussing that.
Oh man. Yeah, I got to listen to that. So glad I subscribed. And I want to, in finishing also, I want to show off a couple more screen shares here, and then we'll finish this up. So I just want to show off your website so people can see it. And this is your latest book, The Hidden Universe, an investigation into non-human intelligences. This is the homepage, anthonypeake.com. Actually, this is the product page. This is the homepage. And then here are essays on, I mean, this is awesome, dude. You got a great website. And then I just real quick, I wanted to show my website. So folks, you can see we're doing this live here on the website, leakproject.com. You can sign in for free. You don't even have to be a paying member. Just sign in, say hello. You can see we've got a lot of people from the UK that are watching this right now. And dude, this was the best interview we have ever done. And I didn't know I could say that because we've had so many incredible interviews, but you stepped it up again, man. Again. Thank you.
I always enjoy talking with you. I always do. You bring out the best in me.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy speaking with you. You bring out the best in me too. And folks, was this awesome or what? So thank you everybody for being here with us. Hit the bell, be well, and be the change you want to see. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Rex. Thanks again. Bye-bye.